Hey guys, and welcome to a new-ish What If here today, which is What If Naruto Wakes Up as a Girl Part 1, and I have done a version of this, which is What If Naruto Wakes Up as a Girl after Wave, which is after the kind of fight with Gato and Zamazar, just, somehow wakes up as a girl for whatever reason, unknown reason. And yeah, this is somewhat more space and time varied, so yeah. Anyway, let's get into this. So, afterward, the second he'd come conscious, he'd realise something was off. He felt off. He couldn't pinpoint it, but he just felt entirely off. Though he'd push back to his mind as he bladdered somewhat cool down there. He'd better, get to the toilet. So he'd up and he'd somewhat kind of look somewhat down, or at least enough down. That is how he didn't necessarily move, but that he'd notice, and just an oversized, that is brown and oversized top, and was kind of confused as he'd remembered, going somewhat to bed and somewhat his normal sleep for, and again he'd just push it back his mind, and he'd go to the bathroom, completely ignoring the mirror, to which if you'd look, you'd realise again his appearance was a lot more different, and he didn't even realise he was a few inches shorter. But nevertheless, he'd walk into his bathroom and would stand opposite the toilet, and he'd go to, grab his penis, but he'd pound would similarly face through right where it should be. He'd be confused and would somewhat lift up the top and look down to see it was flat, and then his hair would actually fall down. Hair would fall down, and you'd notice that it was red and not blonde, and you'd also realise that it fell down. His hair shouldn't be able to fall down as it was spiky. It defied gravity by being spiky. Yeah, and then it would somewhat kind of... Yeah, and he'd somewhat realise that he was a girl, and he'd go to do, release the transformation, but nothing, it wouldn't work. He would pinch himself and would allow a slight groan from the somewhat pain. And somewhat though his bladder, or her bladder, would very much remind her, and would sit down, and as you'd somewhat sit down to, and go and somewhat pee, would try and think what in the earth kind of happened, and yeah. And though once you'd finish and, do bathroom stuff, we'd go back into a sort of room and would just stare, somewhat at stuff, to throw, off the somewhat oversized top, and would somewhat realise that it wasn't just all arms and simply parts of the leg, only somewhat of legs, but her entire body was a kind of soft, creamy white, cushiony skin colour. Not only that, but she had red hair and violet eyes, and also, of course, 6 whisk marks on each cheek. Well, 3 on each cheek, 6 in total. And yeah, in others she looked pretty much more like Kushina instead of so would even look even more feminine, which would have a slight upside. But I'll get to that in a minute or two. Anyway, though, so that Naruto would somewhat realise that if this was just a transformation of that, then would surely, clothes would be the same. So going to his wardrobe, you'd somewhat open it to see somewhat skirts and female clothing, and you'd just stand there somewhat just confused. Where the hell was she? And would go, should somewhat look out the window and would like that this was cone her, she remembered, and would go to the calendar in her sort of room, and she'd stay and would sort of realise that it was the 6-week holiday. Not only that, but it was also the last day. Noting that tomorrow would be the start of the academy, and it'd be confused, and it knows that it was younger. How young, he wasn't sure. The only thing he knew was that he was 12 years old, or was 12 now, he didn't know, but he knew he was 12, and he just graduated from the academy, or more so Iruka had, tied around the headband, and he'd went back, somewhat after giving the scroll back to, the third, went home and pretty much passed out for a few hours. Or at least they passed out and woke up similarly in the past. It somehow went through time and space or something, he didn't know. And yeah, so though from there though seeing somewhat low trousers and a somewhat similarly kind of relatively normal top and jacket, would grab throw those on, would go and grab someone's panties, would pull them on, then the trousers and whatever, would go to the front door, slide on the shinobi sandals or Konrichi sandals, and would then make way to the tower. From there, she'd, would say, hey old man, and Susan would go, Naruto-chan, how are you? Noting the Chan would somewhat definitely meant that was somewhat different, and yeah, though they would sort of talk, and she'd try and convince Susan that she was actually a boy at the age of 12, and though Susan would, of course, somewhat get enough somewhat concerned that he'd actually end up putting a hand on her and sending her to the hospital, and they would examine her, to which they would state that she potentially could have banged her head when she was sleeping and could have done a transformation and someone woke up as a boy, and then it somehow, someone disappeared and, disappeared, all that, and, then the, confusion on gender, he was asked if that was possible, and someone shrugged and stated that it was potentially a possibility, as Naruto was kind of known to randomly transform. Hell, Houston had been scared to hell when a somewhat 6-foot man in Naruto, somewhat opened up the door to Naruto's apartment, and yeah, similarly, somewhat greeting him like like they knew one another, and yeah, so we'd realise that it was definitely a possibility with Naruto at it, and yeah. Though they would ask questions and she'd get it right, but would just be replace, male Naruto with female Naruto, pretty much. And yeah, though those would eventually or at least they would somewhat, though it's actually relatively fine, just thought she was male, and would state that, memory or memory of her actually being a girl would come back to her, and it would do somewhat next day. Some memories of herself would come back, but she could still remember, saying like, and he'd still be confused because he knew he wasn't in his actual body, and the memories he got back was that she seemed to be somewhat a girl that tended to beat the hell out of anyone who pretty much pissed her off. In other words, a Kushina. And yeah, of course. And so when, all these would get dressed and would go to the academy, to which Iruka would note that Naruto seemed to be more passive, though then again, everyone would, almost somewhat everybody was everyone was somewhat to a degree, was somewhat scared of calling her a tomato. And after about 2 weeks, they would see that she was seemingly more passive. Of course, seemingly more, or at least her somewhat, or at least the being, somewhat called that, would just trigger somewhat dormant anger and would seem to just beat the hell out of them. And yeah, after the month of being female, would somewhat have her, would have, somewhat this version of himself full of memories, and the fact he, lived up to he was 12 and like 6-7 months old, and only been 6 and 5 and 6 or so years old. His memories would, some of his personality would be somewhat the just primal one. And yeah, anyway, from there, time would go by, and somewhat eventually, he somewhat would, of course, remember the Shadow Jutsu, but try that to see if she could do it and could still very much do it. And yeah, eventually she would turn, of course, 10. Well, at least it'd be somewhat as she'd sort of be 10, and some of the others would be, of course, 11, as she would try to graduate 2 years early, and she would, of course, end up succeeding by somewhat doing the clone simulating jutsu, or at least the hand sign for the clone jutsu, which ironically was just the same as the Shadow Jutsu. So she would just say clone jutsu and would form a 5 shadow clones, to which Iruka and Mizuki would be surprised actually to do 5 clones, as none of them would actually look too carefully and or blow. Mainly why blow? Because they were casting a shadow, and by this point, Naruto had it'd been about 4 years and had pretty much accepted that he's probably just going to live this life. Well, 6 years. No, yeah, 4. And just he was going to just live this, life as a girl now, and yeah. So far, nothing seemed different. And yeah, anyway, though, due to graduating because she's early, she was somewhat excited. She'd finally get to, actually be a shinobi something. She hadn't experienced, she hadn't experienced yet. And yeah. Though of course, Mizuki would try, would tell her about the, about, a secret thing, and to, kind of progress, and tell her, like, she'd be able to promote Chunin, skip, that, and she would remember what, had happened in the kind of, seemingly past or different wildlife, and would, she'd agree, but would go and tell Hiruzen somewhat, tell Hiruzen about somewhat, Mizuki, and something about that. Hiruzen would somewhat would known about that, similarly, now to believe that, he was simply a boy, or that, though that seemed to just be completely gone now, would, have some, somewhat Ambu go to the place. And yeah, from there, Hiruzen, or at least though, she would wait for similarly Hiruzen to somewhat leave, and once he would, she'd sneak in. Why? To get not really to get, but to read the missing part of the Sharingan Jutsu, as she realized that, of course, before, that she'd realized that there was a part to the Sharingan Jutsu that she had ignored, and that it was short in the, it said warnings, and had ignored that part, but decided that now would be a best chance to kind of read that, and she would, to which Husen would end up, coming back in as the Amber, or at least the somewhat alarm, of course, or at least a alarm, or that would kind of trigger. Seeing that, or just reading it would kind of somewhat gulp, though. And yeah, Husen would somewhat see that and would pale and would, of course, they'd sent, Amber out, so he knew she hadn't necessarily been lying, as they had taken Mizuki to Ibiki to find out that, what his plans were. And he would somewhat just kind of start her and would just immediately tell her what, enough she was doing, and that this could be considered somewhat kind of treason, and she would somewhat just go and would somewhat just go, and seeing that she was similarly reading the chakra jutsu would just somewhat kind of allow a, or at least would mentally kind of sigh, knowing that she should be able to produce it, and he'd ask her if she could produce, that, and so she'd put her hands together and would do a shadow clone, to which, Hazen would somewhat just nod and would overhear somewhat Naruto kind of mentally comparing his reserves to his past reserves, as she'd simply, or at least somewhat the word of, I think I could make more. Isn't him that would kind of somewhat ask her how many more, to which she would just shrug, as sure she'd Naruto realised that his chakra, or her chakra, this Naruto chakra, felt a bit different, not just it was, female, but also just something was different about it. Something he couldn't put his hand on it, or head or chakra on it, but there was something fundamentally different, and it was more powerful. He definitely felt that it was more powerful, similarly denser and stronger. And of course, you remember about the Night Fox, how it was another thing he checked after returning back from seeing Hiruzen, and similarly the visit to the hospital. You had to check on to see if she was indeed, the actual Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, and yeah, still very much was. So, yeah. Anyway, though, or at least though, yeah, they would see Hiruzen would take her outside and would sort of tell her to kind of similarly try and make as much as possible to it. She would, leaving Hiruzen gobsmacked and even herself somewhat surprised, as she would proceed to make 2,000 shadow clones at the age of 10. And yeah, Hiruzen would be dumbfounded, though he would excel, as he'd realised that the only other people that had ever done it was Hashirama and his brother Tobirama Senju, the Senju brothers. And yeah, anyway, though, sort of from there, though, we saw Hiruzen would somewhat sense now to struck reserves, and could somewhat feel that they were that of a somewhat decent level for a civilian, and would tell her that she shouldn't really ever make 2,000 shadow clones. She'd ask kind of why, is she perfectly fine. Hiruzen would somewhat point out that her reserves were kind of bad, dangerous low considering the amount, and that you would say that about 1,500 would probably be the maximum she should do to be able to do some jutsu, and that on a normal day she could, someone on a normal mission could do 1,000. That was somewhat her operational max, to which she'd be confused by operational max and max, to which she was a mistake that, or at least would somewhat go would state, or at least a bit, sorry, I would state that her actual operational max was 1,500, and that just meant that the usable amount that, doing any more tended to not be, any more, but rather somewhat wouldn't be useful, as you wouldn't potentially be able to do, jutsu to keep yourself alive. After all, sure, 1,000, 1,000, 2,000 skeletons are impressive and somewhat useful in sheer numbers, but it becomes a disadvantage if the shinobi could simply, do somewhat Teiyu, water style and knock them all away, or that. So, yeah, so 1,000 max and yeah. Though Hazen would state that if she did refine her chakra control, that she should be able to actually do 2,000 with being able to do normal, or at least having that as her operational max. Some being able to, do a jutsu or two, maybe 3 or 4, before, hitting the, max of, max amount, the sort of limit of chakra. And yeah, she just somewhat kind of nod, and from there, the next day, of course, she'd, be there to finalize, do some final stuff. Not really sure what, like taking a picture and that, to which, of course, would end up, someone, and, of course, encountering Konohamaru. Yeah, so it just happened 2 years earlier, so though it'd be less of a kind of, Konohamaru trying to simply kill the third, and more just who's looking after kind of Konohamaru for his parents, or that. And yeah, anyway, though after kind of meeting them and that, though the day after that, she'd go to the academy to find out if she'd be put on a team, to which she wouldn't be, though the sensei of that class would tell her that to go to the third after some of the hour break, to which she would an hour later, to which Susan would somewhat tell her that she wouldn't have or at least that she would be doing or at least would get a temporary jonin, so would state that a jonin sensei would probably change from time to time, as that, and they'd only really be there to somewhat maybe train her here or there. And yeah, though part of him did kind of quietly hope that Kakashi would actually fail his team this time around, so he could go, right, as you failed your team, I've got this actual genin that instead needs a temporary, say, sensei that, and kind of force Naruto to Kakashi, though of course temporarily, and would of course as such would still assign him missions, but not as many. Yeah, anyway, of course someone that would or at least though the next day, lo and behold, that would indeed happen, and Hiruzen would mentally cheer, of course. Though he would dismiss them all, though would keep Kakashi here and would tell one of his ambush to get who. Kakashi would be somewhat confused, as he wouldn't be aware. Well, no, he would be somewhat aware of Hiruzen's, or not Hiruzen, Minto and Kusuna's daughter passing 2 years earlier, and had kind of hoped that she'd be put on his team, but was somewhat sad that she wasn't, but oh well. And the next thing he knew, the door would be kind of flung somewhat open, going somewhat, "Hey old man, you called?" Kind of dragging somewhat that out as you'd go, somewhat, should I, of not, to which is someone just sat down and go, "You should always knock Naruto." but no, you didn't interrupt anything. Come in. Somewhat rude. And yeah, the door was somewhat shut, and Kikashi, and the doors were just shut by itself. She'd put that much, she'd kick the door open, and thrown the door open with that much force that it shut itself, though Izumi somewhat grumble about having to repair the wall again. And that at least this time none of the hinges, like the door, hadn't gone flying either off the hinges, taking the door frame either with it or breaking through the wall, to which Kikashi would slightly somewhat gone at that, and that seemed to be a miniature Kushner. And yeah. And though it would click to Kikashi, and it then clicked to Kikashi why Naruto was now called, and yeah, Uzumi would simply just nod to Kikashi and would state, and would tell Naruto that, because I told you about, you'd be have a somewhat temporary sensei, to which she'd nod and he'd state that this is Kikashi and that it'd be your temporary somewhat sensei for the year, though he'd state that he would still be going on, somewhat missions that, he would still have his own missions that he'd go on, so she would have, time to herself to either continue, say, learning something that he started teaching her, or to learn something, in her own time. She'd somewhat nod, and that's what she'd start to do anyway. And yeah. And or at least though just somewhat knew that she'd had more time suddenly to do sort of a hobby and kind of garden. And yeah. Though from there 6 months would go by of just pure, or about 4 months would 4 months, 4.5 months would go by of just pure D ranks. Granted, they were broken up as like it would be by maybe 2 weeks of D ranks, then a week or 2 break as Kikashi would be assigned a mission, then simply a month, then, but it wasn't always like that. Surely, our first month of, being again, 2 of those were doing missions, the other 2 was doing whatever she liked as a kind of temporary year sensei was off doing a mission. Once he'd returned, that had continued for about a month and 2 weeks when he was assigned a mission again, and then I'd kind of come back for all but 3 days before being assigned another mission that simply required his specialties. And yeah, it was slightly somewhat annoying, though. Yeah, to a point where she did slowly start just going out and helping the more somewhat elderly people, in be it, taking their shopping home, helping them to take their shopping back, or, some stuff like that. And so eventually that Huzen would kind of call her in today, and would somewhat ask her if she would like to do a D rank by herself. And she was surprised and would ask if he was kind of sure they were chores, but they were still nevertheless a mission, and to do one yourself was a bit, surprising to her, to which he'd nod and would state that he'd kind of gotten a few missions specifically asking for simply her, to which she'd nod and she'd kind of, as such, would start, doing the runs by herself, and thus, by the end of the 5th month, she was doing pretty much, she had a week of just doing them, or at least with Kikashi back in the village, of just her doing the runs by herself. And yeah, though at the 6th month, though, or at least at the end of the 6th month, with her doing pure D runs by herself now, Kikashi would, or at least somewhat, though, would was training her, and by now she could walk up trees and walk on water and could balance a kunai and all that. And yeah, he was, teaching and of course training her like he should do. Just it, some or at least other mission, that he was assigned to kind of got in the way, and he's starting to kind of want to actually just train her to ask to be her full sensei, full time. And yeah, something he kind of realized that Hiruzen may have wanted to instead try and do, but anyway, nevertheless. Though, and so Hiruzen would, or at least they would, go and Kikashi would ask for a C rank, that first C rank, and he'd guess that it was about time that she started going outside the village. And so would let them, would, give them a, just to escort somewhat a caravan to the border of sand and Konoha, fire, the land of fire and sand. To a different team would take from there, and so they would take it, and 2 months would go from, 2 months would go from there, as should be, at least as Kikashi would once more be gone, though by this point she'd taken, or at least they had taken a decent amount of C ranks, with most of them generally, some being kind of, find a missing person to, somewhat to just, escort this person from here to, like, the, next door, or to get this for the village, kind of somewhat errands that were outside the village. They were just D ranks, but outside the village, so pretty much C. Yeah, anyway. So, he was somewhat feeling always confident in her abilities, though Kakashi, before he left for a mission, had tried to convince Hiruzen to not give her a C rank, to not, or at least, to give her a solo C rank, as whilst he knew Naruto was probably more than strong enough to do a C rank solo, he just had something in telling him that she wasn't ready yet. Not only that, but she hadn't killed yet, and as such, killing would be off the table for her, and she could, he just didn't know why. He just had this feeling that, that the universe was telling him that, to convince the Hokage to not give her a C rank, but he'd end up kind of failing. And Hiruzen would, give her a C rank, or at least would offer her a C rank solo, to which she'd ask if he was sure, to which he'd nod and state that she was probably more than strong enough to do a C rank solo, and he'd state that he, is confident enough in her abilities to give her the mission. To which, or at least she'd ask her what it was, to which Hiruzen would state that it was something they kind of did a bit, or at least more, somewhat a lot of, which was locating a missing person, as, mainly as Kakashi was teaching her how to, why they did so many was to help, her develop her tracking abilities and that, and also kind of her surroundings. As Kakashi noticed that she was incredibly good at spotting incredibly fine, minute stuff, but it was only when she was consciously looking for that tiny detail, that slight itsy bitsy movement, that, so I was trying to build that up, but kind of move that from conscious to subconscious, so she could, somewhat, kind of walk past something and, somewhat be, immediately ready to, say, kill, and, to kill someone who tried to, say, ambush her or a future team, or that to say. Not like I'm hinting at anything like that, but anyway, moving on. Yeah, she'd somewhat accept it. And she'd somewhat get ready, would pack for somewhat a month away from calling her, and somewhat it would take her about 2 weeks, which was pretty decent for it was pretty fast for a getting in. As again, she could see those small, she could pick up on those just tiny kind of details that seemingly people would just ignore, and that even some Jolene would even ignore still. And yeah, she was highly observant when she was being conscious of that, otherwise it just flew right past her, her mind. And yeah, so Kakashi's trying to drive that into her subconscious and be fully alert, simply all the time, type thing, mind's relaxed. And yeah, as I said, we'd find, the person 2 weeks, but the person would already somewhat simply be dead, though. And yeah, and this is somewhat kind of was a thing that they were either dead or they were still alive and close to death, but none of the people that they found alive actually died. They were still alive and well. And hell, they even had gotten a C rank or 2 from somebody now, kind of people that they'd rescued for, for just to, of course, help out all that. Anyway, yeah, she'd somewhat though, and so after finding out, because the mission would be, a success, she did find the person. The person was dead, but it was, to find the person, to locate the person. She'd be somewhat on her way home, and she'd end up encountering some person. And of course, this person would be, or somewhat would be of a bandit camp, and she'd somewhat fight and would easily defeat him, but wouldn't kill him because that was just a inhuman thing to do, similarly to her. She hadn't killed before and wasn't going to now, so yeah, and it was on the end. Well, yeah, though the person had kind of had a slightly successful record in faking, that they were kind of permanently down, and so when he noticed that her somewhat attention was off of him, he would immediately get on up, and Nato would somewhat black out, would feel a pain at the back of his neck or her neck, and would end up waking up kind of somewhat cold, and just a bit of blackness, but could almost a sixth sense or 10th or whatever sense was somewhat telling her that there was someone around, not someone but people around, and yeah, she'd hear some voices that she's awake and would be confused and would ask, and could see bars and light shining into the bars, and would ask where the hell was she, to which they'd explain that she'd been captured by a bandit, and she'd realise that, yeah, those should think that, somebody, someone, a shinobi, you can reach out and get out of here, but she'd realise that her chakra reserves were dangerously, well, not dangerously low, but low enough that she couldn't do a shadow clone, as her thought was to just make a shadow clone outside the bars. It then proceeded to unlock the door as she while she could do the transformation, she couldn't really transform into any small creature or that, and yeah, she realised that she may want to kind of learn a way, to be able to do that in the future. And yeah, though a few minutes would go, more or less similar, a few minutes would go by, though when somewhat all of a sudden, they would arrive at the gates, and all is similarly the thing, which they would similarly, the older, somewhat similarly women, the adults would, try, or at least would kind of, try and beg, for them to let them out, even though they had knew it was impossible, but nevertheless. And yeah, they would, though nevertheless, somewhat would kind of open up, to which they would, push back even further, though not would try and go forward. And of course, would, the bandit would get a glimpse of her and would smile come and state that he wanted a new one. Of course, though the adults would immediately start, the adult women would start, that, she's only a child. That would get pretty pissed at that. That meant she was a Connery. She was no child. But nevertheless, she'd end up filling a hand, or at least would somewhat see the women that were simply blocking her / quote unquote protecting her would, pull them apart and would drag her out. She'd be confused and was somewhat, in a way, kind of scared, and also being dragged into some level of light, would realise that she was absolutely confused to her clothes were. She was similarly wearing a similarly oversized top, and even then that looked like it'd seen, better days, and yeah, it wouldn't be somewhat too long until somewhat would be all of a sudden be pushed up against a somewhat wall, and then somewhat, though the top, or somewhat similarly, the male would similarly lower down it, would somewhat lower down his trousers using a single hand, and yeah, and that would somewhat kind of try and get free, but with her chakra was somewhat kind of low down, and also in a kind of somewhat sense of panic, we didn't necessarily be able to kind of overcome the person. And yeah, while she was trying to kind of keep herself calm in that, and yeah, though lastly, person would somewhat end up managing to also successfully pull down his boxes and seeing a penis, a dick in 4 years, somewhat would kind of realise, would somewhat know where that was going due to a somewhat the sex education in in somewhat the class for Conorici, and she knew where that was going, or where it was potentially going, and fear would very much grip her. She'd try and struggle, though he'd just easily uses both his hands and state that it was somewhat no point struggling, and that it would just make her, and to suddenly just somewhat kind of enjoy it, which he would kind of start, would slowly start to well up somewhat in her eyes, as he would somewhat guide it, somewhat just by his body, and well, yeah, would somewhat manage to, or at least would be able to somewhat kind of push his hands together to hold both her hands together on top of her head, or at least over her head, and would then use his other hand to guide it very much in and push it into which Naruto would only know as pain. And yeah, once he'd simply be done somewhat with her feet would kind of somewhat just collapse somewhat to the ground, to which another person would almost immediately pull her up and would proceed to rape her again. And they somewhat similarly almost a few people would end up raping her until similarly the pain and pleasure would get too much, to which it would finally kind of somewhat overwhelm her and would similarly break her mind as her somewhat violet eyes would go dull. Not only that, but her vagina would just be constantly wet. And yeah, after kind of fucking both her vagina, her ass, and even her mouth, they would eventually just throw her back into the cage. And, that was just another broken woman they would just deal with in 2 or 3 days or so. And, yeah. From there, though, the sort of scene that similarly was this, girl who had just been caught was now broke. Similarly, would take her right to the back and would put her over the other similarly broken women and children and adult. And yeah, so the very next day would become conscious again. And they would be, somewhat surprised, and that would kind of happen continuously for about a week, kind of being, though the next day, even though they would sort of use some other room, though by the end of the next day they would catch that she was suddenly up and fully aware. And so somewhat the third day, they decided to drag her out and would sort of note that if she could similarly recover from being broke, then, well, they did have a place where they could pin me down for long-term sex, though that was generally for those that could, had really strong similarly wills, and, the somewhat of men that had fucked her had stated that she had one hell of a good pussy, and so would do exactly that, and would somewhat tie her hands down somewhat to or at least somewhat to kind of, only somewhat outside, which had 2 posts driven into the ground and then a kind of metal rod going, or at least a somewhat similarly metal, somewhat kind of like beam-ish going across, and also kind of somewhat wide enough to somewhat, similarly, hold the hands similarly down, or that, force something to go around, and yeah. And though there would be a cross-metal piece to hold the top, back in that, and then similarly to kind of post again driven into the ground, though on top of something that seemed to be able to kind of move in and out. Not only that, but also up and down, to kind of, somewhat be able to tie her legs to which would be not just tied down, but would be chained. Would somewhat go through some chains. Whereas that her legs were, of course, fixed wide, and whilst there was a bit of movement, couldn't really move them, and likewise couldn't really move her arms at all. And from there, they would proceed to just rape somewhat her vagina, and because they couldn't get to her butt now, they just raped her mouth instead. And hell, even somewhat some using it as a toilet. And yeah, of course, by the end of the somewhat week, she'd start to kind of begrudgingly swallow the piss, as it was the only fluid she'd kind of get, and just wondering where surely, Connor would send out some Shinobi, right? Someone to look for her. And Pearson was slowly starting to kind of get worried, as it had been 3 weeks, and yeah. Though by somewhat the second week, or at least the end of the second week, a whole month, Pearson would finally send Kakashi out, as he had returned to find Naruto, and of course he somewhat now blamed himself, not somewhat that he should have listened to Kakashi, that she wasn't ready. And it didn't help that Kakashi also berated Hiruzen, and also somewhat his Anbu kind of did as well, though he did point out that they didn't do nothing to stop him from assigning a mission, and yeah. Anyway, though, though somewhat a month would go by for her, and which would just be 2 more somewhat weeks, and by somewhat that point, they, or at least similarly, or at least somewhat free of the bandit camp members, which were about, the bandit camp was a somewhat large bandit camp, so for, say, someone like Kakashi to take them on, you'd have to be careful and scope them out, as it had about, a good 200-ish members on the kind of larger side of about 250, but some of those were kind of out, so it was around a number of about 200, 210 maybe. And yeah, as the others were generally out gathering, more women and, and girls. And yeah, and of course getting money in that. Anyway, though, as I said, though 3 of the bandit camps and 3 bandit members, somewhat that simply Smoke decided that, somewhat as they fucked her, or at least that they would kind of get somewhat, or at least a peg or that, to similarly stop, or at least stop her somewhat from being able to breathe from her mouth. Well, not mouth, but nose. And would then pretty much kind of force her somewhat, cigarette, or at least between her lips, and force her to kind of breathe in the smoke, pretty much as a form of torture that she could only somewhat, and that they would release the peg to let her breathe out, but before she could breathe in through her nose again, pretty much so a bit of kind of torture to kind of break her will, and slowly over the somewhat that kind of week, as the 3 started to do that, had started to indeed kind of started to break her mind, quite literally, as it was just pure smoke with very little oxygen. So yeah, and they didn't care if she wound up with permanent brain damage. Hell, if she did, she'd probably be more of a slut, they'd figured, so they kept on doing it. And yeah, though Kakashi somewhat believing that he found Naruto would be, of course, somewhat 2 weeks early, so a month and 2 weeks, to which he would end up not finding Naruto. It was just another bandit camp. When that was close to the mission, to which Kakashi did report back that Naruto's mission was actually a success, and that it was on the return. And though he would deal with the small bandit camp, which was actually an outpost for the larger bandit camp, though he stupidly, kind of stupidly did kill them all, because they did have women trapped there, to which he'd let free, and again message to, or at least would make a shadow clone, to which would somewhat somewhat help them, and would lead them back to kind of Konoha, though he would also have Hiruzen send Anbu out to his shadow clone's position. And though as someone tell you, though as 1 month and 1 week would go by for, as the time, or at least somewhat for Naruto, would roll to a month and 1 week just there, and with the kind of similarly somewhat torture and that still continuing on, her will had kind of started breaking, or had truly started to break, to a point where she was now starting to kind of, like, her hope to be rescued was starting to really just be thrown, to be destroyed, to the point where she was even just enjoying the sex moaning. from the pleasure and starting to enjoy just the orgasms. And was, well, yeah, starting to become a bit of a somewhat kind of just dump or slut. And the three somewhat the three bandicam members had, or at least that had somewhat smooth that, did that, kind of torture, as I said earlier, or at least had kind of grown to 10 people doing it to her, and them just enjoying her. She seemingly kind of struggled, though, even then, kind of due to some of her mind just breaking, and that had shown him that she seemed to somewhat like it, mainly. And yeah. Anyway, though, as another somewhat, though, by the time another 2 weeks would pass, Kakashi would end up finding them, but due to this, point and the constant just not only sex and that, had left pretty much, though Kakashi could see that there was a female out, similarly kind of in the open, pinned down, completely, naked. Yeah, he knew that woman clearly, or girl, woman, female, definitely female, had to just minded similarly to him, had to be broken. And he would put that as his last priority to come and check out after, getting clearly, some of the other women that he'd seen, the other somewhat thugs, taken out. Yeah, and he'd realised that the band camp was 200 plus, so he'd scope it out for a week, ironically dragging out Nato's suffering to 2 whole months. And yeah, with those somewhat action, though, all these 2 weeks of just that, all hope had pretty much had lost by this point. And yeah, and somewhat as such, was just truly enjoying, had fully, all the resistance had kind of lost. And she was now just truly just enjoying the sex, and hell, even somewhat the similarly somewhat piss that they would, somewhat piss in the mouth, and yeah, with some of the bandits even saying that they should probably maybe let her kind of, somewhat free, and, somewhat have her, or at least, put somewhere more internally, kind of permanently, so she didn't potentially kind of get ill, from kind of the cold or that, which was starting to, come as winter was kind of coming upon them. And yeah, whilst they would kind of decide on that, though, they would somewhat still consider do the torture, or at least semi-smoke torture, to which by this point, hell was even somewhat enjoying, kind of similarly even blown out, trying to do either somewhat, rings or other stuff like that. And yeah, all hope had completely shattered in her mind, though with her 2 months of suffering, Kika and Kakashi would, of course, somewhat finally, go on the attack, would end up wiping out the entire bandit camp, and, or at least because it'd been pretty much a month, or at least, well, no, not necessarily, anyway, his Shankon had gotten, or at least had met up with the army who the cyclone had dispelled. And yeah, though Kakashi would, well, he somewhat would, of course, know that they were, safe and were back in Konoha, or should be by now. And yeah, so he would send or at least he would, would make another clone to go back to Konoha with the other women, as he'd go and check out to make sure there were no other kind of, hidden places where women were kept, or females were kept. to which there were none besides from the one he saw outside. Literally, to which he'd go and somewhat, as he'd kind of, somewhat slowly walk up, because Naruto would hear and would somewhat kind of rotate her head to kind of see the person, and when somewhat she would, Kakashi would somewhat see, or at least noticing the kind of dull violet eyes, would mainly somewhat stop, and somewhat he'd kind of realize that also would notice that the hair which had kind of definitely had lost its kind of bright red shine and was now kind of almost just like a dark, very dark red, and he could see gum, and other stuff in her hair. And yeah, though before you could even say Naruto, you could hear, or at least this girl, someone say, quite very quietly and clearly, somewhat painfully, sensei, should say very quietly, and her eyes would slightly somewhat well up at seeing Kakashi there, as they did care for her, or at least Kakashi did. He came out, and yeah, though not only that, but also kind of more so worried about the other girls, would somewhat, though he has realized that it was truly Naruto, after would shake his mind and would try his head to clear his mind, and would rush to her, and before he could apologize, she'd ask, what about the other gals? To which Kakashi would immediately tell her that they were safe, to which she'd somewhat would state good before passing out. Kakashi would immediately kind of somewhat worry and would cut her bonds easily, and would kind of then realize that she should have done like last and gentle pulse. So she'd let her sigh, and yeah, he'd pick her up and would leave, not directly back to Konoha, as he'd leave, or at least he'd somewhat remember or at least he'd head in the direction knowing where that was a stream, and once he'd arrive at the stream, he'd somewhat would, or at least he'd make a shadow clone to set up camp for the night, or that, as he knew he'd probably be staying here for or at least hopefully not that long, but at least for the night. And yeah, as somewhat and he'd go and would somewhat wash out his hair, bringing somewhat hair products, knowing that Nato was probably definitely kidnapped, and well, yeah, would just try and hope that something like this would maybe help her. He didn't really know, and to be honest, he'd known that she'd very much had been raped, and would clear all the gum off her body, and hell, when Hiruzen gave him the okay to leave, he'd asked somewhat a medic in how to potentially clear, or at least remove cum or that, from the vagina or that, which they'd told him how to, and even how to teach, and how a somewhat Konrichi can also do it by themselves, and also kind of how to, using his own chakra, figure out the rough level of the person's current chakra level. And yeah, all kind of techniques that any shinobi could do, it wasn't. And yeah, so once he'd clean her hair and her body off, he would also get, rid of all the gum from her vagina and that. And also note that her shoes somewhat kind of similarly looked, weaker. And not only that, but or at least her chakra was similarly low, and the only reason why it could be low was due to either, well, there was no bonus on the current, Fox one, which she'd chat the HIgram, the HIgram tetragram seal, which was still perfectly, fine to his knowledge. And yeah, the only reason why her chakra had stayed so low was because it was being used by her healing factor and kind of, to hold back Hey the Fox, and also her, again, healing factor to heal up the damage and that they had done, the raping had done, the kind of torture and that had done on her, somewhat on her internals, and yeah. Anyway, with somewhat that, though, someone she would end up kind of waking up, to which when she'd wake up the second time, to which she would be completely dried and hadn't even dressed in her, or at least some clothes, or at least the clothes she'd or at least somewhat she'd kind of wear, not necessarily her shinobi outfit, but something she should be at least more comfortable in, instead of just being completely naked. And yeah, seeing that she's starting to wake would get, or at least that flask ready as he, and would somewhat, he wouldn't give it to her as he assumed that, she's probably too weak, and, or maybe not exactly too weak, but was mentally probably too weak to handle anything like that, and would, give her water almost immediately, and she'd down it as fast as possible. And yeah, with Kakashi noticing that, or at least noting that she didn't even seem to be just, swallowing it, it just seemed to go straight into her stomach. And yeah, nevertheless, it would be fully empty, and good to see her stomach was definitely a bit larger due to the entire flask being drained into her stomach, but nevertheless, she let out a sigh, a kind of quiet sigh, and would also try and say thank you, though Kakashi would stop her and just tell her to kind of somewhat rest, to which she would kind of put some hand on her stomach and would rub it kind of in a somewhat sack or that, indicating that she was somewhat hungry. If she wasn't allowed to speak, she could at least do some level of sign language to indicate that she was hungry. Kakashi would give her something to eat, but not necessarily too much, as she had just downed water. And from there, she'd end up passing out, and that would kind of be though some time later, she'd end up waking up to kind of go to the toilet, which Kakashi would end up having to aid her somewhat in, and she'd be able to ask a bit more clearly for food again, though still painful. To which Kakashi would cook, or at least would cook enough food to somewhat kind of satisfy her. And yeah, it would be somewhat the next day with, of course, a full, somewhat stomach of food and a, good full night's sleep. Her reserves were rapidly, replenishing themselves. And also, though, as they were kind of rapidly replenishing, they were also draining to kind of repair, the body and the damage done. And yeah, so though the next morning and that, they would, or at least should wake up and would kind of do breakfast, which she'd end up waking up to the smell, and after eating that, to which she could speak clearly without any pain, to which Kakashi would see and would kind of realise that the healing factor was impressive. Though she would somewhat struggle a bit to walk, though they would be walking for a bit, when Kakashi noticed that she was starting to breathe very heavily and kind of rapidly, to which they would stop, and she would proceed to then, after a few seconds, simply cough would cough so hard that simply blood would splatter onto the floor, and seeing that, he would immediately scoop her up and would, go full throttle all the way back to Konoha, pulling up his headband to reveal his Sharingan, so he could see where he was jumping to be most efficient and the fastest way possible, and to figure out the fastest way possible to get back to Konoha. Not only that, but he was forcing so much chakra into his legs that he was pretty much exceeding his network's capacity in his legs, and he could feel not only his muscles as he forced chakra into his muscles even more than they could take. So not only that, but of course overwhelmed him. Though he was straining both his feet and his chakra network in his legs. And though he didn't care for the pain because, fuck, if she was coughing up blood back to Konoha as fast as possible, and no, he wouldn't even say hi or anything like that to the gate guards. He'd just fly right past, right through, Konoha, and would go immediately to the hospital. And of course, they were already somewhat kind of ready, as Kakashi had sent back a bird when he'd set up camp. Or at least the clone did once the camp was set up. That they had, somewhat Naruto, they had got it'd gotten Naruto, and they should be back tomorrow, if not tomorrow, then the day at latest. And anyway, though, of course, so they were, somewhat seeing somewhat there, or at least Kika should hand her over to them, to which they would take her away. Though one would kind of ask what, or at least watch, kind of, or at least would somewhat, what was wrong with her, to which she'd state that he kind of didn't know her, and would somewhat almost specifically collapse, to which she would somewhat help, and would kind of realize that he also needed help. And some other, or at least another set of another medic in, two medics would come to take Kakashi, though it's like that he didn't know, just actually started coughing up blood and got here as fast as humanly possible, lowering down the hit height, knowing that he'd probably overwhelmed his actual muscles in his legs, and they would find that he'd stressed his muscles and had potentially done permanent damage to his chakra network in his feet. And of course, with now missing Naruto, and that they would send out a message to Hiruzen that she was back and in a bad sort of way, and that she may end up having permanent, or at least though as they would, because she is somewhat more so physically fine, mentally more so a lot better than what Naruto was. Though Kakashi would, get them to get her, or at least into the room and that, and Kakashi, Hiruzen would just tell them that, to tell him, when she was released, and she'd end up, though they would release her into the same room as Kakashi, as she'd be somewhat kind of asleep, though, and they would tell Kakashi now, or at least what kind of, what was kind of wrong with Naruto, that she seemed to have some potentially damage to her lungs, some potential permanent brain damage, and also potentially some reproductive permanent damage as well, and potentially some other internal organ damage, and that they've done their best to help and replenish her chakra reserves, which state was just draining as fast as they could fill it. To which Kakashi somewhat knew if her reserves were staying low, just meant she was rapidly healing. But Kakashi was confused, or well, I don't know, though. Yeah, of course they would tell Hiruzen that, and instead of going and visiting her immediately, he'd instead write a message up for Tsunade, which he'd, send, and of course Tsunade, or at least Tsunade, would receive it and would go back to Konoha, though would take a good somewhat day, as she wasn't necessarily in too heavy of a rush, but still a urge of emergency was there, or importancy, but would still arrive there a day later, though once Naruto was somewhat awake. Though any time a magnet would come in, if it's female, so it's not shake. If it's a male, couldn't, they couldn't even enter the room. They could just open the door and she'd curl up into a ball, and yeah, they somewhat had managed to kind of heal parts of her, or at least had managed to heal enough of her that, and yeah, she was still even shaken when, somewhat still even once they'd left because of Kakashi, and the only reason why she wasn't freaking out and crying all that was because Kakashi was the one that saved her and was her sensei in a way. And yeah. Anyway, though, from there, of course, somewhat they would tell Hiruzen that she was awake, and Hiruzen would just enter the room just like the others, and she would start violently shaking her, and he wouldn't even get anywhere. He wouldn't even get close to her bed. He could walk up to Kakashi's bed. She'd still violently shake, but would be fine. The second he would be, level with the end of Kakashi's bed, or at least the second it'd be in the middle between, somewhat the space between Kakashi's bed and her bed, as she'd somewhat tears would start forming in her eyes, and as he'd get a step closer, she'd kind of almost tell him to go away, leave her somewhat alone, and he would see that, and he knew it wasn't necessarily in a way meant to, it was just her, what she'd gone through, it was trauma to a insane level, and that he would stand back, and she was still crying and saying that, so he would just tell Kakashi that you'd probably be the only one to get close to her, and yeah, from there, he would leave kind of heartbroken and just upset with himself that he had failed this hard with Naruto and protecting her. And yeah, he should have listened to Kakashi, and yeah, though, yeah. Anyway, though Kakashi somewhat knew Naruto wouldn't blame Hiruzen. As much as he may want to blame Hiruzen, he knew in reality he could only necessarily blame himself for not trying harder to stop stopping Hiruzen, or hell, should have took her training a lot more seriously than what he actually did. So Kakashi kind of blamed himself, Hiruzen blamed himself, Anbu kind of blamed Kakashi and themselves, and Naruto naturally kind of blamed herself for taking the mission in the first place, and well, yeah, just yeah. And with that, guys, I'm going to end this part here. So if you have enjoyed this part, do tell me in the comments down below, and if you want part 2, do tell me, guys. And hope you guys have a good day or night, depending on wherever you are and whenever you watch this, and good bye.